You might already know that America was founded on an idea of having religious freedom. And when you're driving down the street, you might see a lot of different churches. You might see a Lutheran church, a Catholic church, a Baptist church, a Methodist church, a Presbyterian church, or even a Protestant church. Well, where did all those different churches come from? Well, they came from the Reformation. And in today's lesson, we're going to ask ourselves the question, how did the Protestant Reformation change European society? Let's take a look at our lesson question. How did the Protestant Reformation change European society? Well, in order to learn more about that, we're first going to look at Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. And then we're going to move to the spread of the Reformation, where we're going to really explore a couple of the branches of Christianity that were going on at this time, specifically the Church of England and also Calvinism. But before we get started, let's take a look at what life was like before the Protestant Reformation. So what was life like before the Reformation? Well, the Renaissance was going on, and the Renaissance was a time of great change. Now, there was a celebration of realism and the individual that was portrayed in a lot of artwork during this time period. A big change that also took place was the development of the printing press, which made books accessible to the masses, including the Bible. And also there was an examination of the wider or more secular world. When I say secular, I mean things that aren't necessarily religious in nature. Take a look at that picture that I just outlined for you. You can see that they're looking through a telescope. And you can also see that there is a globe sitting right next to them. Let's go back to our lesson question. How did the Protestant Reformation change European society? Well, we took a look at what was going on during the Renaissance before the Protestant Reformation. And now we're actually going to start answering our lesson question. We're going to start by looking at Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. So I want to spend some time talking about the Catholic Church during the Renaissance. And I want you to remember that at this point in time, I am speaking only about the Catholic Church during the 1500s, not the modern-day Catholic Church. So keep that in mind as we're moving through this lesson. Now, at this time period, the Church was a dominant force in European life. It was heavily involved in politics, and it was resented by some monarchs because it did have so much power. Also, it was generally supported by the people because the Church supported the people. And also, it was increasingly seen as overly powerful and corrupt. In some cases, the Catholic Church and the leaders of the Catholic Church were more powerful than kings or lords of the day. Now, the people got most of their education by going to church services and having a priest read to them from the Bible. So the church was very important during this time period, and likewise very powerful. Now, there were early church critics, and the first thing we're going to talk about is this man, John Wycliffe, right here. And in the mid-1300s, John Wycliffe issued a challenge to the Catholic Church. He questioned key religious teachings, which was a very Renaissance idea, to question authority and to want to interpret things for yourself. Now, in order to interpret the Bible for himself, he translated the Bible into English. Before this time period, only popes and priests would read from the Bible because the Bible was written in Latin, and not everyone could read Latin or even speak Latin. So you were really at the whim of your pope or your priest as far as what the translation of the Bible was trying to tell you. Now, when John Wycliffe translated it into English, it was made available to the masses, and people were able to translate these ideas for themselves, which was so important during this time period. Another church critic was this man. This is Martin Luther, and he was a German priest and a religious scholar. He wrote the 95 Theses, which criticized church practices. He had some problems with the Catholic Church, although he was a priest himself. He didn't want people to move away from the Catholic Church. He wanted to change some of the practices that he saw going on. And also, he launched the Reformation with his 95 Theses. And he inspired the creation of a new Protestant churches. Now, when I say Protestant churches, what I mean by that is simply not Catholic. Now, let's analyze some of the problems that he had with the Catholic Church. To analyze something is to really explore its meaning even deeper. Priests were selling indulgences at this time, and an indulgence is the process by which people can pay money to the Catholic Church and then buy their way into heaven. If I give the church a certain amount of money, then they will give me a blessing. And when I die, my soul will make it into heaven because I've given the church money. And Luther believed that this was wrong. He claimed that the church was implying that people could buy their way into heaven. And in his 95 Theses, number 27 said this: "There is no divine authority for preaching that so soon as the penny jingles into the money box, that the soul flies out of purgatory." So let's analyze this a little bit more. There is no divine authority for preaching, which means divine authority says God does not say this, the Bible does not say this, that so soon as the penny jingles into the money box, if people put money into the contribution plate at the Catholic Church, that the soul flies out of purgatory, that their soul will be saved and go to heaven. Purgatory, this word right here, this is where some Christians believe that the soul waits until it's determined whether or not that person's soul will make it to heaven or to hell. Now, moving on, Luther made other complaints against the church. He didn't approve of the fact that the church's belief that only priests could forgive sin. He believed that God himself had the power to forgive people, and that idea he called grace. Now, the extravagant lifestyle of the Pope and the other church leaders, that was also something he had a problem with. Remember that at this time, the Catholic Church was so powerful, and they had a lot of money. And these priests and these popes lived these extravagant lifestyles. And Martin Luther thought that they should be more pious and be more of the people and make themselves more relatable. Now let's compare and contrast Protestant, meaning non-Catholic, and Catholic ideas. When we make a chart like this, it's really easy to help us compare and contrast because we line up similar things and we're looking for similarities and also differences. Martin Luther criticized the practices and the core beliefs of the Catholic Church. Now let's look at Luther's ideas here for a moment. He believed that only your faith, not necessarily your good works or what you did for others on earth, brought you salvation. He also believed that all Christians were equal in God's view, that God cared for everyone equally, and that the Bible should be translated so that people could read it on their own. Remember, here he's talking about John Wycliffe, and he's agreeing with him and saying, yes, translate it into a language that people can understand. Take the power away from the popes and the priests and let the people read it for themselves. Now, the Catholic Church, on the other hand, they believe that both faith and good works brought salvation. They believe that priests and popes were closer to God than other people. Regular citizens couldn't be as cared for or loved by God as a pope or a priest could, a pope or a priest. And the Bible should remain in Latin, and that only priests should be able to read and interpret this. Now, remember that the Renaissance is going on right now, and that the idea that you should question authority and learn things for yourself was so important. And so the idea that this Bible should remain inaccessible to the people and that only priests and popes should be able to interpret it, that was an unpopular idea at this time. And the reason that the Catholic Church really felt this way and wanted to hang on to these was they were scared of Martin Luther and his radical ideas. Because if you change the church at this time, remember that the church held all the power. If you changed the church, you were going to change society as a whole. Everything was going to change if you started to question the ideas of the church. Let's talk about how the church reacted to the ideas of Martin Luther. From the scientific perspective, this is a lot of right, back to our lesson question. How did the Protestant Reformation change European society? Well, we've already taken a look at Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and now let's start to move on to the actual spread of the Reformation. All right, now remember the man who started it all. This is Martin Luther, and in Germany, he had a religious disagreement with the Catholic Church. Now we're going to go to England, and we're going to look at King Henry VIII, who had a political disagreement with the Pope. Now, if you look at this slide, there's a lot of information, so I want you to just sort of focus on what I'm saying for a moment. Here's King Henry VIII, and his biggest problem was that he wanted to have a son. He wanted his wife to give birth to a son so that he had a male heir. Well, he was married 6 times in a quest to produce his male heir. However, it was unsuccessful. He did have a daughter that Catherine of Aragon gave birth to, and he wanted the Pope to annul his marriage to her, which means to legally end, or like legally divorce. But the Pope wasn't going to do this. Catherine of Aragon actually had a brother who was very close to the Pope, and so the Pope didn't want to go against the brother. However, King Henry VIII said, no, I'm going to go ahead and divorce her anyway, and he married a woman named Anne Boleyn, and so the Pope excommunicated him in 1533. Now, in response to his excommunication, King Henry VIII actually started his own church. He formed the Protestant Church of England in response, and he actually put himself in the leadership role. He put himself as the head of the church. Now, why was this a problem? Well, he's also the king. And so what he declared was that Catholicism was no longer going to be the main religion in England. He was going to proclaim that his own religion, the Protestant Church of England, was now going to be the big religion in town, and that he himself was going to be in charge of it, not the Pope. Now let's take a look at the Church of England. It was organized kind of like the Catholic Church, but the king took the place of the Pope. It used the Book of Common Prayer to conduct its services in English. Now, that's important because remember, in the Catholic Church, most services were conducted in Latin. If you look over here, here's the cover page for the Book of Common Prayer. Now, it also incorporated some Protestant, but also some Catholic beliefs. When you start a new religion, it's a little difficult to completely pull away from your own religion. So there are similar ideas between Protestantism and Catholicism. All right, let's go back to our lesson question. How did the Protestant Reformation change European society? Remember, we talked about Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, and then we also talked about John Wycliffe and how he was encouraging people at this time period to read the Bible in English and interpret the meanings for themselves and to question the authority of the Catholic Church. This spread the Reformation, and we took a look at King Henry VIII, who started the Protestant Church of England. Next, we're going to take another look at another branch of religion. We're going to start by looking at Calvinism. All right, let's put a visual representation to the spread of the Reformation. Remember that it started with the Catholic Church and people who were beginning to question the ideas behind the Catholic Church, like King Henry VIII in England and Martin Luther in Germany. Now, Martin Luther inspired people like Earl of Zwingli in Switzerland and also John Calvin in Switzerland. And today we're going to look a little bit more at John Calvin. And now he and his branch of Christianity, Calvinism, inspired other branches like the Presbyterians and the Huguenots. Now, this is John Calvin. And he fled religious persecution in France, and he settled in Switzerland. He wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion, which explained the Reformation, and he influenced the establishment of many churches throughout Europe. He and his branch of Christianity, Calvinism, actually led to many other branches of Christianity and many other churches that were beginning to show up during this time. Now, the key features of Calvinism, what does it mean to be a Calvinist? Well, Calvinism, or those that follow John Calvin, is built around these key beliefs. First, that all people, by their nature, are sinful. They are born sinful. Humans are flawed. They are sinful in the eyes of God because they're not deities themselves. And this is a very Renaissance idea, to notice the personal and individual flaws in a human. Now, God has chosen to save some people and to condemn others, a belief that was known as predestination. What predestination is is that God has already decided before you were even born whether or not when you die you're going to go to heaven or to hell. And there's nothing that you can do on earth as a human to change that. And what that led to was the belief that all people were equal under God. Now, moving on a little bit, Calvinism really took over in Geneva, Switzerland, right here. And they created a theocracy in Geneva where everyone attended religious services and classes, and everyone and everywhere bright clothing and card playing were outlawed, and that those who broke these laws, they could be banished or even executed. And what I want you to really think about looking at this slide is to notice the similarities between what's happening right here with Calvinism and the Catholic Church. Remember that before the Reformation began, the Catholic Church, that was the main church. Everyone was a Catholic. And they had so much power and they gained so much influence. But here, we're actually seeing where a Protestant church, Calvinism, is taking over and gaining popularity over one entire city. There are all these similarities because their power is growing, their influence is growing, and everyone is attending these religious services and following the rules of this new Protestant religion. All right, so what were some of the effects of the Reformation? Well, we talked about some of them, and we talked about how Bibles were being translated into many languages now, not just English, many languages. Everyone was able to gain access and interpret the meanings of the Bible for themselves. People began to read and interpret the Bible for themselves, which inspired our map over here. Remember that before the Bible could be interpreted by individuals, this entire map would have only represented Catholicism. But now we see that there are many colors representing many different branches of Christianity. New Protestant denominations spread.
Many church leaders, like John Calvin, believed that having religious art in a church was the same as worshiping idols. When Protestant leaders took over Catholic churches, they ordered the removal or destruction of religious paintings, sculptures, and other imagery. This is called iconoclasm. Where these images could not be removed, they were destroyed. In this photo, you can see the faces of the sculptures on this altarpiece were damaged so that they were no longer visible. Even gold altarpieces, like cups and plates, were melted down. It's important to note that this destruction varied from region to region. While Calvinists even prohibited plain crosses from being displayed, some religious leaders, like Martin Luther, allowed some religious images to remain. During the Reformation, architecture, art, and music were transformed. Newly created art began to reflect humanism and other Protestant ideals. Narrative scenes from the Bible became more prevalent. Take a look at this painting, which shows Christ calling St. Matthew to leave his job as a tax collector to become one of his disciples. You can see how the painting reflects one of the important themes of the Reformation, a more personal relationship with God. Both Christ and the religious St. Matthew are portrayed as ordinary people. Art became increasingly secular as artists began to concentrate on non-religious themes like history and landscapes. They also began to accurately depict the events in people's everyday lives, like this painting titled Peasant Wedding. In addition, songs of worship, called hymns, were written and sung in some Protestant churches. Martin Luther composed many famous hymns, often in his native German, so that ordinary worshippers could participate in religious services. Here is Luther singing with his family.
Here we can see the beginning of the Reformation starting in 1517 when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses beginning the Reformation. Now let's take a look at some of the things that were happening during this time period. Here we see that the Renaissance is also occurring during this time period, encouraging people to question authority, to seek out knowledge for themselves. And these two things together inspired all these other things that we see. We see Calvin publishing his Institutes of Religion, and we see that the Church of England is being established. And then we see the real popularity grow, and we see that Lutheran churches were dominating Northern Europe at this time. All right, so what were some of the effects of the Reformation? Well, we talked about some of them, and we talked about how Bibles were being translated into many languages now, not just English, many languages. Everyone was able to gain access and interpret the meanings of the Bible for themselves. People began to read and interpret the Bible for themselves, which inspired our map over here. Remember that before the Bible could be interpreted by individuals, this entire map would have only represented Catholicism. But now we see that there are many colors representing many different branches of Christianity. New Protestant denominations spread.
Many church leaders, like John Calvin, believed that having religious art in a church was the same as worshiping idols. When Protestant leaders took over Catholic churches, they ordered the removal or destruction of religious paintings, sculptures, and other imagery. This is called iconoclasm. Where these images could not be removed, they were destroyed. In this photo, you can see the faces of the sculptures on this altarpiece were damaged so that they were no longer visible. Even gold altarpieces, like cups and plates, were melted down. It's important to note that this destruction varied from region to region. While Calvinists even prohibited plain crosses from being displayed, some religious leaders, like Martin Luther, allowed some religious images to remain. During the Reformation, architecture, art, and music were transformed. Newly created art began to reflect humanism and other Protestant ideals. Narrative scenes from the Bible became more prevalent. Take a look at this painting, which shows Christ calling St. Matthew to leave his job as a tax collector to become one of his disciples. You can see how the painting reflects one of the important themes of the Reformation, a more personal relationship with God. Both Christ and the religious St. Matthew are portrayed as ordinary people. Art became increasingly secular as artists began to concentrate on non-religious themes like history and landscapes. They also began to accurately depict the events in people's everyday lives, like this painting titled Peasant Wedding. In addition, songs of worship, called hymns, were written and sung in some Protestant churches. Martin Luther composed many famous hymns, often in his native German, so that ordinary worshippers could participate in religious services. Here is Luther singing with his family.
Here we can see the beginning of the Reformation, starting in 1517, when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses, beginning the Reformation. Now let's take a look at some of the things that were happening during this time period. Here we see that the Renaissance is also occurring during this time period, encouraging people to question authority, to seek out knowledge for themselves. And these two things together inspired all these other things that we see. We see Calvin publishing his Institutes of Religion, and we see that the Church of England is being established. And then we see the real popularity grow, and we see that Lutheran churches were dominating Northern Europe at this time.